Hello, everyone. We are back with our last class of the day, and we've saved a wonderful class for you. We're so excited to have Marty Wolf here. Hello, Marty. How are you?
Hello.
Awesome. So we are excited to, oh, you know what? Hold on a second. I was getting a little feedback, but we're back. So basically, we are going to let Marty take over here and teach his class. Please let us know where you're viewing from, where you're coming in from, and let us know what you want to know all about Japanese family history. Japanese family history is something that Marty is very passionate about. He's taught many classes on rootstech.org during RootsTech in consecutive years. He teaches a live monthly webinar that you can actually get access to. We're going to put in the chat here a link to his Facebook page where he actually teaches live webinars every month, and he answers questions all about Japanese family history as well. He works as an environmental engineer in Sacramento, California now, but loves helping people with their Koseki, which is actually the topic of our class today, and that's your Japanese ancestral line and records. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. With that, I just want to extend the invitation for you to put your comments and questions in the stream, and we will make sure that we're able to get to them live. If you're watching the replay, please continue to ask your questions, and we'll get to them after that. And with that, Marty, why don't you take it away? Thanks for being here.
Okay. Thank you. Aaron, thanks for the introduction. As Aaron mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the Japanese Koseki family registers, and in particular, how immigration documents tie into that. And you might ask, well, why do you need that? And unlike other places throughout the world, the immigration documents are going to be the only way that you can trace back to, in this case, the homeland, Japan. You have to go through the immigration documents. There are not publicly available documents that you can look up your ancestors from. So you need to look at their individual immigration records. So with that, I'd like to move on to the presentation. I found this clipping a couple years ago, but I think it's important to know. This is Lee Iacocca. He was the CEO of Chrysler back in the mid 80s, back when I was in high school. He was very well known. And he said, all the success I've had, all the jobs I saved, and the lives I've influenced would never have happened if my parents had been turned away at Ellis Island. And for those of you that are of Japanese descent, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, somebody decided to get on a boat and come over to the United States, or come over to Canada or Hawaii or Brazil, for whatever reason. And there are various reasons why that was done. But I have a slightly similar background. My father was born in Amsterdam in the Netherlands during World War II, and he immigrated to the United States in 1957. So I empathize a lot with Lee Iacocca, as well as people of Japanese ancestry who have immigrated. So with that, we will continue going. Just a little bit of background, context for the Japanese immigration. Total Japanese immigration, about 100,000 to mainland U.S., 150,000 to Hawaii. At one point, I believe that Japanese consisted of one half the population of Hawaii. 10,000 to Canada, 250,000 to Brazil. It's not really well known, but there are actually more Japanese Brazilians than Japanese Americans right now. And then in Latin America, Peru was the other major destination of Japanese immigrants. However, they went to other places as well, Bolivia, Mexico. And for comparison, when people think immigration, they're always thinking Ellis Island on the other side of the United States in New York. 1907 was the peak year of immigration through Ellis Island at just a little bit over 1 million. And then the peak day was on April 17th of 1907, where you had almost 12,000 people came in to the United States on that day. So you can see that, some of these Japanese immigration numbers are really not that big if you look at the immigrants coming from Europe, the Italians, the Polish, and various groups. But and it's not as big of a total population, or compared to the total Japanese population, as countries such as Ireland and Norway, where more than 1/3 of the population immigrated to the United States. Continue on with Japanese immigration. Compared to some of the other countries, it's fairly well documented. It occurred a little bit later, so there are standardized immigration forms, standardized documents. In some cases, as you move into the 1920s, 1930s, you get typewritten documents, which are great to read. In addition, Japanese immigration, there were often multiple trips. Children were often sent back to Japan for schooling. People were sent back for marriage. Often people would go back. The one time they would go back would be to visit the family gravesite. Here in Sacramento, I met a family where the father went back to Japan because he had terminal cancer and wanted to die in Japan rather than the United States. So there are multiple trips that are made by many of these Japanese immigrant families. And so it's easier to find them in the documented record. And then the other thing is it's not too far back. The peak of Japanese immigration was basically from 1885 until about 1924, when there were various laws enacted by Congress that basically shut off immigration. So a 40-year window between 1885 and 1925. There were a few that came over before that, but in general, that's the window that you're talking about. Another thing that makes the Japanese immigration a little different has to do with the surnames and Asian surnames. For instance, when you're talking Chinese, there's only about 6,000 possible surnames, of which the top 100 are used by 85% of the population. You go to Korea, it's even more concentrated, with less than 300 surnames, with the top 3, Kim, Lee, and Park, used by half of the people. Go to Vietnam, 100 surnames, and the top 3, Nguyen, Tran, and Lee, are widely used. Nguyen is used by almost 40% of the population. I know that the high school that my children went to, that Nguyen was the most common surname of all the students in the high school. So compared to that, Japanese surnames, there are many more. That 300,000 is a rough estimate and depends on who you talk to. I've seen numbers ranging anywhere from 150,000 to 400,000, depending on how you read the various kanji. So top 10 used by 10% of the population, and top 100 used by 33% of the population. And the most common Japanese surnames here, Sato, Suzuki, Takahashi, Tanaka, and Watanabe, you can see that they're all between 1 to 1.5%. And you may ask, well, why is this really that important when we're talking about family history? The reason that it is important to know is that it's fairly easy to pick out individuals in the immigration records compared to other countries. I have had to help people try to find a John Sullivan immigrating from Ireland, or a Johann Schmidt immigrating from Germany. Those are extremely common names, and it's extremely difficult to pick out who was the immigrant that you are related to. Compared to that, many of the Japanese names, maybe there's 1 or 2 or 3 people, and you can usually distinguish by what part of Japan they came from, or their birth year. Okay, jumping into my main focus that I do on most of my classes, as well as my Facebook page. Koseki are the starting point for all family history research in Japan. And I've capitalized the word all. And I probably should bold that, and I should probably underline it, because even if you are a Japanese citizen, you have Japanese nationality, you start with Koseki and you go back from there. People will sometimes say, oh, I need to look at the mon, the family crest, or something like that. You really need to start with Koseki. And at times I feel like I'm repeating myself over and over, and I probably am, but that is where you need to start. The only way that you could possibly avoid going with Koseki is if there's some existing contact through letter or phone with relatives in Japan, or if you have an extremely rare name in a very focused geographic area, sometimes you can find somebody in the phone book. But in general, you need to be starting with the Koseki. And the reason is Japanese citizens are all listed in the Koseki. And for Nikkei, or people of Japanese ancestry, the challenge is connecting back to an ancestor who was listed on the Koseki. Now, all of the Issei, and that is the first generation immigrants, they were all listed on a Koseki. Some of the Nisei, the second generation, are listed, but not all of them. And then when you get down to Sansei, the third generation, in general, they are not listed. So you need to get, in order to go back to Japan, in order to go back before the Issei immigrants, you need to get into the Koseki. And people will say, well, how far can you go back? And the answer is you can go back 2 to 4 generations before. And you can sometimes get into the late 1700s in some cases using the Koseki documents. A little background on the family registers, the Koseki. They started out in 1872. And 1872, you might ask, well, why then? In 1868, there was a major historical event that happened in Japan. It was the Meiji Restoration in 1868. The ruling power in Japan transferred from the ruling military shogun, or shogun. Shogun is proper pronunciation. And the power was transferred over to the emperor. And Japan was opening up to the West. And in an effort to open up to the West and modernize, they decided they needed to get a handle on how many people were there in the entire country. They really didn't know. And so Koseki, the family registers, was an effort to enumerate the number of people in Japan. And you see similar things that happened in other parts of the world. I mentioned that I'm half Dutch. A similar thing happened in the Netherlands after the Netherlands were conquered by Napoleon. He implemented some similar things to move the records from the churches to some actual civil records that were kept by the government. Now, the family registers, the Koseki, are Japanese civil records. And the big difference is that they're maintained at the family level or the household level. There are no individual birth certificates. There are no individual marriage certificates, no individual death certificates. All that information is listed on the Koseki family registers. And these documents can range from 1 page up to 15. And they can include dozens of individuals. And in some limited cases, they can include up to 7 total generations. You can have the head of the household and his parents may be listed, and a grandmother may be listed, and the grandmother's father may be listed, and the head of the household, his children may be listed, and his grandchildren, and his great-grandchildren. You may have up to 7 generations listed. And coming from a family history perspective, that's incredible that you can find dozens of individuals, up to 7 generations from one document, as opposed to other countries where you spend time and time and time tracking down one person's birth certificate or one person's death certificate. The family registers have a lot more information in one document. However, they can be more challenging to obtain. The family registers are maintained by municipal offices. And at the time of immigration, 100 years ago, 120 years ago, that was the village hall. Over time, the Japanese municipal entities have merged, annexed, whatever. So now you have town halls, you have city halls, the large cities, the Yokohama, the Kyoto, Osaka, those all now have city ward halls or offices. Okay, what do you need for Koseki requests? There's three things. First, identify where ancestors are from. Second thing, prove how you are related. And the third one is prove who you are. Now, proving who you are, that's very simple. You just need to provide a driver's license or something like that to show who you are. You also need to prove how you are related. So if you are third generation, you can provide a birth certificate that lists your mother, who's second generation. And if you have your mother's birth certificate, it will list her, and it will list her first generation parents. That's all you need to do. Usually birth certificates are the best. Death certificates and marriage information can also be used. But the hard one often is identify where the ancestors are from. How do you find where they're from? And you can't just say, oh, they're from Hiroshima. Oh, they're from Yamaguchi. They're from Kumamoto. They're from Okinawa. It needs to be a little more specific than that. There is a term that if you're going to investigate your family history from Japan, that you need to be familiar with, is honsekichi. And the best translation is probably permanent residence or the permanent domicile. Consider this to be the ancestral village. Okay. Now, this is not necessarily where someone lives. There are millions of people that live in Tokyo and Yokohama and Osaka right now in Japan that their honsekichi is out in the middle of the countryside. Okay. It's not where they necessarily live. Okay. You absolutely have to have the village name, or the town name, or in some limited cases, the city name. But you absolutely have to have the village name. Again, you can't just say, oh, they're from Hiroshima. You need the village in Hiroshima. Okay. On the flip side of that, the village name is usually sufficient. And what I mean by that is there is a myth out there among the people of Japanese ancestry that you need to know the house number or the lot number where your ancestors came from. And the truth is, no, you don't. A lot of these villages had 100 people or 200 people. I mean, if you have that lot number, that's great. But if you don't, that's usually okay. And even if the municipal offices causes some problems, I can usually argue with them and tell them, no, we're good here. So you do need the village name, but you don't have to get anything beyond that. One exception, if they came from a city, and when I say a city, this is a city at the time of immigration. So a city from 100 years ago. And these are the large cities that you are all familiar with. You do need a little more detailed information. You can't just say, oh, they're from the city of Yokohama. Well, Yokohama had hundreds of thousands and maybe millions of people. We need to be a little more specific for that. A little bit of geographic background. Here are the 47 prefectures that exist in Japan. Typically, they're counted from the north or the northeast, from the northern island of Hokkaido. It's the one in pink there, stretching down through Honshu, Shikoku, Kyushu, and then the last prefecture usually is number 47 is Okinawa, which is off to the southwest. It's not to scale. Okinawa is almost to Taiwan. If you get to Taiwan, you've gone too far, but Okinawa is quite a ways down there. Here's a list of the prefectures. In general, in Japanese, they're called ken, which is often translated as rural prefecture. Hokkaido is a little different. And then the ones in blue, light blue, Fu is usually translated as the urban prefecture. There was a Tokyo Fu, which changed to Tokyo To, which means metropolis. For some reason, they changed it in the middle of World War II in 1943. There are a couple of things noted in green, cities that do not match the prefecture name, Sendai, Yokohama, Nagoya. And then the ones in red. On this one, this is kind of eastern, northern Japan. The ones in red are areas that had a lot of immigration. So that would be Fukushima and Niigata. Now, immigration from Japan was a Western phenomenon, Western Japanese phenomenon. You can see the large number of prefectures: Shiga, Wakayama, Hiroshima, Yamaguchi, Fukuoka, Kumamoto, Kagoshima, and Okinawa. All of those had lots and lots of immigration. As you can see, Kyoto and Osaka have been urban areas for, in the case of Osaka, 500 years. Kyoto has been the capital since 794. Those have always been urban areas. Going on, talking a little bit about cities, towns, and villages. Before the Meiji Restoration, and again in 1868, you had feudal domains, castle towns, and natural villages. With the Meiji Restoration, the Meiji government decided, let's establish geopolitical entities. And so in 1878 and 79, they established the prefectures. That the map I showed you, that came into play or came into being 1878, 1879. Hokkaido and Okinawa were later. Hokkaido was just being settled, and Okinawa had an issue that it had been paying tribute both to the Japanese government and the Chinese government. So there was a bit of a dispute at that point as to how to deal with Okinawa. The cities, the districts, towns, and villages came into being 1889 to 1890. And then, as you can see, the number of cities increased as you went from the middle Meiji to the end, the end of Meiji in 1912, and then the end of the Taisho period in 1926. By this time, most of the immigration had already happened. But 101 cities is not very many. There's 700 some odd there right now. After the Meiji Restoration, you had, again, the prefectures. You had a couple cities. And if it wasn't in the city, it was in a district or a gun. It's not gun, but gun, which had mainly villages, the Muda or the Son, and then some towns, Machi or Cho. Currently, 2023, the prefectures still exist. The cities still exist. The largest 20 cities have wards. It's subdivided into wards. And then you still have the towns and villages. The districts no longer exist except for the post office. A couple of other things to point out. The term for village, usually when you talk a village, the term is Muda. And when you're talking about a specific village, Nishikawa Muda or Higashiyama Muda, Muda is the word that you use. However, the term Son, which is a different reading for the kanji that you see there, is commonly used in Hiroshima, Yamaguchi, and Okinawa. So when you're looking at records, look for both Mura and Son. There's a couple other things listed on the right. Owaza and Ku are village sections. They are sometimes the natural villages that existed before 1889. Aza and Koaza exist in some places. If you're dealing with Kyoto City, they actually have street names. It's the only place in Japan that has street names. And so the addresses are very, very, very complicated. In Kyushu, around Nagasaki and Saga, there are some other terms that are used: go, myo, men, and fure. Eki and Shuku are used along the old highways. Ura is the inlet. It's translated as inlet, but this is also a village, usually a coastal village. And then finally, the house number, lot number, banshi, banyashiki, bank, or bante. And you can see those sometimes. Now you may ask, how do I find the Honsekichi? And there's a number of places you can look for. The first one is the Japanese passports. And the document on the left is a Japanese passport. And it's a great looking document. It's embossed. It's in color. It has fancy stamps on it. The document on the right is actually the application that went with the passport. This was done with Wakayama Prefecture. Usually the applications were thrown away at the port after they got the passport, but occasionally someone kept it. But look in the old dusty box that you got from Oba-chan, your grandmother, and see if they have a document that looks like this. Most people do not know what this is, but this is a Japanese passport issued by the Imperial Japanese government, and it is the gold standard because it was issued by the Japanese government. They cannot doubt it. It is what it is. And let's see. Oh, my color didn't show up. I put a highlighting in here and it didn't show up. I gave highlighting showing you where the Honsekichi was. So I'm going to have a whole bunch of duplicate slides here. Oh, well. There is also an index of Japanese passports, which is maintained by the Diplomatic Archives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. It's in Tokyo. It's not available online. I believe that Family Search has microfilmed it, but it is still in microfilm only. I have friends in Japan who might be able to help you if you need this. This is what a Koseki looks like. And you may say, well, why do I need a Koseki to look for Honsekichi? And what this provides in the bottom third is a listing of the individuals in the Koseki. The upper 2/3 provides some details, and the details are important for people that married in. So a wife's, the maternal line through a wife would be listed here on where you make that request. Let's say someone married the head of the household and came into the household, where she came from. Again, the maternal line is listed there. Anyone who was adopted out or in is listed there as well. So like this document, and it's not going to show up, this document provided in the upper 2/3 Honsekichi for 4 other lines. Again, the highlight is not showing up. If you're from Hawaii, the Hawaii consulate maintains Japanese family registration cards. And that top line right below where it says Japanese family registration cards, right on the left, it says what the family name is. And on the right, it provides where it says 1439 there on the very far right. That is the Honsekichi, clear down to the house number 1439. So if you have connections to Hawaii, And by connections, that means that someone was in Hawaii for multiple years. Contact the Japanese consulate in Honolulu, and they can get you that registration card in about a week, maybe 2 weeks. And this is where they're at. A files, the alien files. I don't like that, but that's what they're called. Can be very good. Towards the bottom, it says name and complete address of nearest relative or friend at time of entry. And it says Moto Miyamachi. And that was all that was needed to make the request for this person. Many of you will be looking at passenger list and manifest. These are a good source, but sometimes it doesn't always have information. If you look at column 11, which is kind of in the middle, it says place of birth. There are 4 individuals listed there with Japanese birthplaces. The top one and the bottom one say Muda, you can see that. And the 2 middle ones say Machi, so that's town in Japan. Also on the far right, it says last permanent address. And so there's a couple individuals on the right who have an address in Japan, even though they were born in the United States. I believe they were born in Los Angeles, San Francisco. That last permanent address is likely the address of an uncle or a brother or somebody that they're related to, and is probably the Honsekichi. So look at both of those. I believe this is from 1928 or 29. So as you can see, this is typewritten, very well organized. But both the place of birth and the permanent address are valuable. This is a 2-page document. The indexing of passenger lists tends to be on the first page. There is a second page, and I forgot to look, but there is probably some additional information on closest relative on page 2. Most of you, if you're looking on Family Search or Ancestry, will start running into these passenger lists and manifests. And again, there may be multiple trips, and so you may want to look at multiple records. Some of the early ones don't have this information. But as you get into the 1900s, 1910, 1920, the information gets more and more detailed. Okay, next slide. I had no idea, but World War I draft registration cards at the bottom provides the address, and this happens to be in Japan, of the nearest relative. And this is only good if the guy was single at the time of World War I. If they were married, they tend to list their spouse living in Los Angeles or Seattle or wherever, Victoria, Vancouver. Well, actually, in Canada, that's different. But in the United States, San Francisco, Los Angeles. But if they're single, they will often list. And in this case, they listed their mother. Non-ship entrances occasionally. This one ended up not being complete, but this was someone who entered into El Paso, Texas from Juarez, Mexico, Chihuahua, Mexico in 1918. I've seen a number of people crossing from San Diego into Tijuana and back, down in Nogales, Arizona, into Mexico, El Paso, also up in Canada, coming from both Vancouver and Victoria. Often there will be a non-ship entrance. People will walk across the border. So that's another thing to look at. Not an immigration record per se, but something to look at. Buddhist temple records. This is from a Buddhist temple in Watsonville, California. In general, you will not be able to get access due to privacy laws to the Japanese Buddhist temple records. But Japanese American, Japanese Canadian, some of the other ones located overseas may be able to provide information. And this one did. Also, I taught a class on this with Roots Tech this year, 2023. Okinawa Immigration Record Database. If you have ancestors from Okinawa, definitely check this out. It is the first of its kind in Japan. Most of the other information is not available for other places. This is, and so if you're have Okinawa roots, definitely go here. Where to request the Koseki documents? Identify what is the current municipality. Identify the village from the Honsekichi. Input the village name into Find My Koseki search tool at this website. A couple of years ago, me and a fourth generation Japanese American said one of the biggest obstacles is figuring out where to find it. So we developed a database that links the 15,000 1889 villages with the 1900 current cities, towns, and villages. So it crosswalks those information. We're in the process of updating it, going back to the Meiji Restoration. We added about 1,500 villages for Yamaguchi and Hiroshima Prefecture, about 2,000 for Shiga Prefecture, and we've got another 1,800 that are almost online for Wakayama Prefecture. So that search tool is a lookup database that lets you look and figure out where to send it. It identifies the appropriate municipality. Again, if you put in something like Nishikawa, and do not put in the suffix Mura, but if you put in Nishikawa or Higashiyama, you may get 30 responses. Pick the one that applies. Go to the one in Hiroshima or the one in Kumamoto or the one wherever. And then click on Koseki request address, and it will print out the address in both English and Japanese. And you can slap that on the front of your envelope and send it to Japan, and it'll go where it needs to go. Occasionally, very occasionally, there will be a slight miss due to a boundary change that isn't well documented. But in general, this has a 99% success rate. More information on Koseki requests. As Aaron mentioned, I've taught classes at Roots Tech for the last 3 years. Back in 2022, I taught a 3-session series. This covers about 45 minutes. We've been talking here for about 37, so 45 minutes of class. It'll focus more specifically on what needs to be done with the Koseki requests and how to request them. Online data sources, I've mentioned some of these in passing. Ship manifest, again, family search, ancestry. A-files are with the National Archives. The family registration cards are with the Honolulu Consulate. The Okinawa database is right there at that link. For those of you that are Japanese Canadian, you can check in with the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center in Vancouver. I have worked with them a little bit. They provided me with a 1929 directory of Japanese Canadians. I am not allowed to share that with people. However, I am allowed to use it as a reference material. And if you give me a name, I can look those names up and identify where they came from. MyKoseki.com, again, I mentioned that. And then the Roots Tech presentations from the last 3 years. Some online tools that are useful. English Wikipedia is okay. Japanese Wikipedia is, I put excellent here. I probably should downgrade it to very good because they have terrible documentation on Hiroshima, which is the main prefecture where there was immigration from. So it's not as good as I would like it to be. Google Maps, Google Earth. There is a Japanese phone directory that is online. The years 2000, 2007, and 2012 are available for free. They charge 500 yen for other years. Translation. Google Translate is getting better. I prefer using DeepL. Jisho.org if you're really into looking up kanji. And then Weeblio, this is what I use just for my general Japanese dictionary use. Contacts, again, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, which I believe their native Japanese speakers have come back during the pandemic. They were not always available. Also, the Family History Centers. I run a Facebook group right there. Look up Japanese family history. We've got about 1,800 people online. This is really designed for non-Japanese speakers. We talk about Japanese a lot, but it's for non-Japanese speakers. We've got about 1,800 people currently registered. My contacts, there is my cell number. No phone calls, text me only, please. There is my phone number and my email address. And then if you want to look for me on Facebook, look for me, Martinus.Wolf. I believe I'm the only US-based one. There are 2 or 3 other guys that live over in the Netherlands, having the nice Dutch name, but they are not me. So that's where you can find me. Feel free to ask me any questions. It's all, as was mentioned, I have a day job. I am not a professional genealogist. So, feel free to ask me any questions that you might have, and I give you a quick, short answer. If you're looking for an actual Koseki translation, and there was a question that came up from Byron. Can you assist with translating Koseki records or documents written in old Japanese or dialects? And the answer is yes, I can. I would appreciate some reimbursement for that. People will often say that, and I've had this come back from people have talked with their Japanese friends, and then their Japanese friends say, I can't translate this because it's classical Japanese. And I was a Japanese, well, I had a Japanese undergraduate degree, or received a Japanese undergraduate degree. And as part of that, I had to take classical Japanese. What is on the Koseki documents is not classical Japanese, and it's not even close. However, it is pre-war Japanese, which is no longer used. And so it is, I don't want to say archaic, but it's getting close to it. And so it's really not that hard, but even many translation companies in the United States and Japan, many of them will not translate Koseki documents, or if they do, they will charge you extra for that. So anyway, I think I'm at the end of my show. This is my questions, and I'm done here. So we'll let Erin come back on and talk a little bit here.
This is awesome. This is really awesome. And thanks for everyone for tuning in. We'll ask a few more questions that came in to Marty. And then there was a bit of a technical glitch on a few of the platforms. So a lot of you are probably watching this as a replay. Please still ask your questions. We will make sure we get them to Marty to answer for you afterwards. Let's ask this from Patty, though, on Facebook. What if my Korean grandma and grandpa traveled out of Japan to Honolulu in 1903 to 1919? Korea was under Japanese occupation at that time. Any thoughts on that, Marty?
I would, and just as a little background, I am familiar. I lived in Japan. I served as a missionary for the LDS Church from 1988 to 1990, and I lived in Kobe, and there were a large number of Korean Japanese that were living there, and so I am familiar with a little bit with the Korean population. And at that time, they, and I don't know all the nuances, but it is, I would suggest, I guess the leading question here is, I would suggest contacting the Honolulu consulate and seeing what they have. In many cases, All of the Korean Japanese that I personally knew, they all had Japanese names. There was a Korean school that was just down the street from where we met as a church. And so I would definitely, especially given that time frame that you're talking about, 1903 to 1919, I would definitely contact the consulate. One of the things that I was asked by the organizers of Roots Tech 2024 was to come up with some ideas of what to present next year. And the due date's in like a week or so. And one of the things that I was just thinking about was, family history under Japanese colonialism. And that is a little bit of a sensitive issue. And so that is something I would definitely look at. Okay, other questions?
Yes, we had a few more. Aline asks from YouTube, how many types of Koseki are there?
I'm not sure exactly what is meant by that, but I'll give a quick rundown. And this is covered in my Koseki class. There is Koseki is the general term for family registers, but it also refers to the active registers. So Japanese people living in Japan have an active Koseki that they're listed on. Now, when people leave and people are crossed off of the Koseki they get married, they die, they are adopted somewhere else, or they naturalize somewhere else, they are crossed off of the Koseki. And eventually, everyone gets crossed off. And at that point, the Koseki becomes a Joseki. And so those are the ones that you will often get when you make a request for documents from the Japanese municipal offices. People will say, why is everybody crossed out? I say, well, that's the way it is. It's not that they're no longer valid. From a record keeping standpoint, they were taken out of the family, but they are actual people that existed. So that's the first one, Koseki or Joseki. There is another type, Hara Koseki, which refers to Koseki that was made because of a Japanese regulation change. This will often be after World War II, they moved from household-based to family-based. So you don't have the large number of families, or uncle is not there, cousins are not there. It's really the nuclear family the way that we think of now. So that's a Hara Koseki. Also, beginning in 1995, they moved from the handwritten documents and they digitized everything. So there's another version that was made in 1995. Again, for those whose ancestors immigrated 100 years ago, you probably will not run into those. So those are the three main types. There's two different formats. There is a Tohon, which is the overall, I don't know what you'd call it, the expanded version. And then there's a Shohon, which is an abstract. And you often see the Shohon with the war brides, or those that married American or Canadian servicemen. And the abstract will list that individual and the parents, and that's all it will show. And that's similar to Japanese when they apply for a passport now, they have to show part of their Koseki, and they only get part of it. They show part of it. They don't need to show, they don't need to show their great uncle. That's not relevant. They need to show themselves and their parents. And so any of you with war bride mothers or recent immigrants, post-war immigrants, you may run into the Shohon. It's not typical if your ancestors came over 120 years ago. Let's see. I'll take some more questions.
Yes. No, I think that's great information. This one came in from YouTube from Aylin Co. Hi, are there opportunities or resources available for connecting with living relatives in Japan through the Koseki system?
Okay. Everyone wants to know this. And the direct answer is not really. Especially if your ancestors immigrated 100 years ago. Because at some point, once they naturalized, and for many people that was after World War II or they died, they are no longer listed in a Koseki. And so they are unable to get onto existing documents that are out there. That being said, there are two ways that you can do. The advantage of the Honsekichi, the permanent address or domicile, is in some cases, that address still exists. The ancestral home is still out there. And so I showed the one from Hawaii with the number, I think it was 1539. There may be a house out there that still is 1539. And if you look it up in the directory, there may be someone with that same last name living at that house, in which case you are probably related to them. The other option would be, okay, maybe you don't have the exact lot name, or lot number, but maybe you have 6 or 8 individuals that are in that general vicinity. You can send out I call it a mass mailing, but 8 people is not a mass mailing. But you can send out letters saying, I am looking for people that are related to my grandfather. And people do get responses that way. The other thing, I mentioned you can base it on the address, but there are also instances where, I mentioned that there are multiple generations listed on the Koseki documents. And in some cases, you will get individuals that were born in 1935, 1940, 1950 that are listed on the Koseki who may still be living. And you can look them up in the phone directory. So this would be like a grandson. This would be a grandson of your, I don't know what it'd be, great nephew, your grandfather's brother's grandson or great grandson. And usually it's a male. The females will often marry and you can't find where they went. Another example, if you have a rare name, and when I say rare, I mean there are 5, 10, 15 people in Japan with your same surname, there's another opportunity for a mass mailing. There's been a number of people that have found ancestors that way. I showed the Japanese passport, and it's from someone that I know here in Sacramento, and the last name is very rare. There's only 2 people in Japan with that last name. And when I told her that, she said, there's 10 times that number of people in Sacramento with that last name. So you can sometimes get some very rare names, and you can sometimes find them as you're looking. So let me see. There's another question here that I do want to address.
Is it this one from Jamie? This actually is from one of our mods, but it came in through Roots Tech. Yes. Can you explain any cultural or traditional practices related to Koseki and how they might impact my research?
Okay. Can you explain any cultural traditional practices? Okay. There's a couple things going on. Number one, and I didn't mention this in this class, but in my general Koseki class, you can only make a request if you have a direct relationship. It needs to be direct blood or direct adopted relationship. So, for instance, your grandfather may be on a Koseki and his brother may be listed on the Koseki. You cannot request for his brother or your grandfather's brother. He will be listed on that one document, but you can't go look on his branch documents after he got married and set up a new household. You can't do that. You could do that up until 1970 or so. And so for those of you digging through the old dusty box, you may find documents that are on mimeograph blueprint paper. Or even older than that, you may find onion skin documents, really thin rice paper type documents. They're almost see-through. Sometimes those documents are for people that you might not be able to request now. And so those are very valuable. They talk about a family tree branching out like this. They use that all the time. Unfortunately, due to Japanese privacy laws, your tree is going to be kind of narrow. It's just the way it is. You can't go sideways very far in Japan. Related to that, there are the Japanese privacy laws. I mentioned earlier that you are unable to go to the Buddhist temple and request. Those are, in general, unless you've got really good connections, you're not going to be able to get information from the Buddhist temple records, which in many cases can go back centuries. 15th century, 14th century. You can't get to those. And that ties into a third or another thing, is that previously early versions of the Koseki listed what social class the Japanese people came from. And the usual version, based on Confucian teachings going back a long time, is that there's 4 classes. There is the samurai class, which is only 8 to 10% of the population. And it's not what everyone thinks that they're related to samurai. Samurai's top. Second level is the peasant farmers. Third level is the artisan, a blacksmith type. And the bottom is the merchants. In practice, in the day-to-day, the peasant is pretty low. But it's an agrarian society. The rice harvest drives everything, and so they're put at number 2. The merchants, by the time the Meiji Restoration came around, the merchants were running the show in Japan. All the samurai were, not all, almost all samurai were indebted to the merchants. And so there was, samurai were teaching school, they were doing side hustles, they were doing whatever. So things had changed. Okay, so there's 4 classes. The problem is that there were other people that fell outside of that. And there's a group of people called Budakumin, lower class, people that were involved with leather tanning and dealing with dead bodies, and they were considered to be ritually unclean. And that was indicated in the Koseki documents. And what was happening with the Budakumin was that private investigators were investigating for companies or for individuals. Should this company hire someone who's Budakumin? Should my son marry this woman who is of Budakumin descent? And so 50 years ago, it was decided, no, you should not be doing that because that's discrimination. And so that's why you can only ask for yourself the Koseki documents. That's why you cannot get records from the Buddhist temples, because investigators were going to the Buddhist temple to dig up information. And what's also happened is that the earliest Koseki are not available. They are under lock and key and are not available for family history research or academic research. And you basically have to be involved with a case before the Japanese Supreme Court to even have access to them. So consider those out of bounds. But if you have old documents on the mimeograph paper or the onion skin paper, you may find out, in fact, that your ancestors were farmers because their class is indicated. So there's a couple of things where it indicates there may be a hesitancy when you start approaching potential relatives, when you start talking Koseki, because there's been a number of cases where Japanese people have asked Japanese Americans or Japanese Canadians, can you share the Koseki with me? So it's not, they do have their family history related traditions. However, a lot of them are not tied to the Koseki. A lot of them are tied with the Kakocho, which I also talked about in 2023 Roots Tech, the Buddhist death records that are kept often in the Butsudan, or the family altar, where they will show when, what day of the month certain people passed away and what year they passed away. The problem there is you start running into posthumous Buddhist names which don't match up with anyone you know. So there are some history there, some issues. There are some, we tell people, be careful when you post Koseki. If you need a small translation or something, be careful what you're posting.
Yeah, that makes sense. We had I think you covered all the ones that came in. We are so grateful, Marty, for you to be here. What we'll do is, again, if you're watching the replay, or if you notice that your question wasn't answered, I think we got all of them, but we may have missed some. Please reach out. I'm going to post a link to Marty's Facebook group, because I want all of you to be able to go there and join that community that he has created, where he does a lot of lives and gives information. So please reach out to him there as well. So let me put that here.
Also,
and then
on the questions, sorry to interrupt, Aaron, but
no, that's okay.
Please email me if you got anything that's questionable, or that's not clear. I know Patty had a question, and I don't think I totally answered it, dealing with Korean grandma and grandpa. Email me with details. If you do send scans, I request that you please keep the resolution low. People send me these very high resolution files that are 20, 25, 30 megabytes, and that gets too much to handle. So just send me a low resolution. In general, that will work.
Okay, perfect. That's a great tip for everyone. Thank you again for being here with us. Make sure that you come to Roots Tech 2024 when it's live. I'm sure that Marty will be there sharing great information. We got a sneak peek on what he might be talking about. And in the meantime, let us know if you have questions, and we'll make sure we get to them. Thank you again so much for being here, and have a great day, everybody.
Okay, thank you.